I would like everyone just to share what's their favorite creator economy or influencer piece of content or some project that they've worked on. So we'll start with Matt and then we'll work our way around again.
If I have to pick one, that would be a very recent collaboration that I'm really excited about, because a couple of weeks ago, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam contacted me. They reached out and asked, do you want to make a video or two together with us? And that was really special because I adore Van Gogh. He's one of my all-time favorites. I'm not the only one, I guess. And I've loved that museum for years, visited it several times. So at the moment I am in the middle of producing videos for the Van Gogh Museum, and I'm really, really happy and proud to be doing that. And in the past, I've worked with the National Gallery in London. I'm doing videos for the National Gallery in Washington. So I'm just insanely grateful that I can work with those iconic institutions. So yeah, I'm really happy.
That's incredible. Ellie?
Yeah, I kind of touched on it in my intro, but my Children Creators project has been something that I've been working on in the last kind of 3 to 4 years. We really wanted to do something big on social for our bicentenary, which was last May. And I've always loved working with content creators. I think they are just have such a different perspective on places like museums and institutions and galleries like the National Gallery, which sometimes can feel very, old or kind of out of date for people today, which I don't agree with at all. I think it has so many different stories we can tell that's still relevant. So yeah, working with our kind of 20 creative collaborators over the last kind of year or so, and hearing what they want to talk about the gallery in terms of whether it's the staff or our paintings or our collection and our building and the history has been really exciting. And they've pulled out stories that even I didn't really think of about our collection, which has been amazing. And we've seen such great results on our channels. It's kind of all of the content's kind of, I think it's around 40 million views across all of our channels and the creators channels. So I think you can really tell how excited they were as well as I was to work with it in the content we produced. So that's been a really exciting time as part of our 20th birthday to kind of be able to shine a light on all of these amazing content creators who have such engaged communities, and they know, especially with Matt, your storytelling is just next to none as well. I'm really such a fan, and it was amazing to work with you last year on some content as well. So I think it's such a great resource to be working with content creators. So yeah, that's kind of my favorite thing I've done, kind of the only thing I've done the last couple of years as well.
The only thing, but what a thing. So that it works. And then Vyki?
Well, I've been really fortunate. I've worked with a number of places in London and nationally as well. So it's a bit like picking your favourite child. So apologies if I've worked with you and I'm not mentioning you. It doesn't mean that I don't really appreciate what we've done. But I suppose for me, it's always the ongoing partnerships which really give you a chance to build a relationship with your audience and also get to know that brand and how to work with them. So one of the ones that I've been doing now over a number of years has been with the Art Fund. And that's been fantastic as well, because the offer for families is actually very good, but quite complicated. And being able to kind of start to simplify that and show something which might at first seem that it's not designed for families, and being able to say, oh, actually, I use it here and that sort of thing. And also over time, and I like the way that they come back with different projects and things like that. So it's always a different messaging. But yeah, like I said, I've been very fortunate to work with lots of great people.
I love that. And I love that idea of building community and how you build those kind of relationships with other with the organizations that you're working with, so you can make it long term. And we'll definitely touch on that a little bit later. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of areas that we're going to try and cover today. So the first would be understanding the roles of influencers in the sector. Then we're going to look at finding approaches and the kind of right creators for cultural organizations. Then we'll look at, like I kind of just touched on, how you build those long-term relationships. And then finally, some best practices if you're on a budget, or what budgets look like for different curators depending on the size and scale of those curators. So I'm going to start with some individual questions. So Matt, starting with you, what's one of the biggest arts focused, as one of the biggest arts focused curators, what do you think museums and culture institutions often don't understand about working with influencers?
To be honest, I haven't yet had a collaboration that featured any real big misunderstandings. So maybe I've been lucky, I don't know. In my experience, I think we've come to a point where most institutions understand the basics of working with creators, and that's obviously a very good thing. And I think that helps. I always try to brief museums clearly beforehand. I have made a document that I share with them, and I tell them, how a collaboration usually works, what my workflow is, the different steps, how long it takes to make a video, and all the things that I can do, and also the things that I can't do. That's really important. And I think that kind of open communication helps to avoid or to prevent misunderstandings. If I have to point out one thing, it's the biggest one, and it's obvious, but it's the importance of creative freedom, obviously. Most museums and institutions, when they approach me, they approach me because of my style and because of my tone of voice, so they know what I'm about and they know the kind of content that I make. So they usually give me loads of creative freedom within a brief, of course, within a briefing. So they trust my way of telling stories, and that's something I obviously really appreciate. I have a specific tone of voice. I mean, I have to be honest, I have different tones of voices. I can make serious videos and quirky ones. Depends on the topic. But they are usually playful, fast-paced, sometimes weird, and that's what makes them, I think, resonate with my audience. And that might be an audience that might not follow traditional museums. So if you want to reach them, you have to speak a different language, a different tone of voice, and that's why that trust in that voice, when that comes from a museum, that's really important. Just to break out of the traditional way of talking to your, I don't want to call them clients, but your visitors, if you know what I mean. So yeah, to summarize, I've had great experiences with working with museums, and to be honest, not too many misunderstandings, fortunately. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant, because I do love what you said in terms of you lay out how you can work and how you can't work, and that makes it very clear from the beginning for anyone who wants to work with you. These are the boundaries. This is what I can do, and that should then help. Ellie, I want to jump to you real quickly. So obviously, the National Gallery, you worked with literally hundreds of creators for this project. How did influencer collaborations? Why do you think they're so important in today's way of communicating and reaching audiences?
Yeah, I mean, Matthijs has kind of touched on that. I think it's we have such a loyal fan base, and we've got amazing communities across all of our channels, which I've been fostering for the last kind of 10 years whilst I've been at the gallery, which is amazing. But the content creators and the audiences that they've fostered have such an authentic feel to them as well. They're trusted by their communities. And I think it's really important that we are able to go outside of our own bubble. We obviously have an amazing following, but we're not potentially reaching all those people that we kind of want to come to the gallery. I mean, I'm always thinking about my friends or people younger and how to get them interested in our collection. I think we've got a lot of older paintings, so our collection goes back to like the 1300s, but it stops at the early 1900s. So there's can be a bit of a misconception that those paintings aren't relevant to today. But there's, like I said, there's so many different stories you can tell. So I think that's so important, and why content creators are amazing at what they do, because they can find those hooks that their audiences are really interested in and run with them, and they know how to make a really engaged piece of content, and they're also trusted by their followers. It's not kind of this it's really authentic, and I think that's the word I love using with content creators. There's this authenticity, and also there's this knowledge of their audiences that we won't have coming cold to them. So they know, like Matt was saying, it's really important when I work with content creators, they know their audiences better than I do, for them to come to me to say, actually, that might work on your channels, but I think if we do it this way, that'll hook them a lot better. And I've actually learned a lot from content creators in terms of editing style, and a lot of the time I'm like, I've worked with content creators who are like, you have to cut every like 2 seconds, and I'm like, they're not going to see the painting, and they're like, it doesn't matter, it will keep them engaged and we're saying really interesting stuff, so let's keep it moving on this video to keep them watching. So I learn a lot from them, just even, you know, even when I'm briefing them for the content I would like them to create, I'm still always thinking about how we can improve our own content and how we become even more social first in the content that we're creating as well. So yeah, I think they're just an amazing kind of resource to be learning from, and for them to be helping their own audiences learn about us. So I really can't, you know, exaggerate enough how amazing it is to work with these content creators. And you know, it's just I've learned so much all the time. Every time I do a new brief with people, they come with something new. It's really exciting.
I think that's a really interesting point you said about how we can learn from the creators themselves, because the language of the internet is so different from the language you might use in a cultural organization itself, and understanding that it's different, and being okay with the fact that it's a different, we're not trying to reach the same people or patrons who come who walk in our organization. It's a different audience online, which I think is really important. So Vyki, so you obviously work both sides. So you work as you're literally a curator and work at an organization, and you're an influencer. So how does you've seen both sides of that coin? How do you manage it both, and have you got any tips for organizations trying to connect with smaller influencers?
I think so. It's quite interesting because in some ways I've had to mentally separate them, because what's asked of me as a museum curator is very specific and actually very detailed and very niche. And actually what's expected of me as a creator is very different. It's a completely different audience. I'm talking to mums as a mum, and that's who I'm talking to them as. I think they respect, and a lot of them, a lot of my followers don't actually know I even have a job. They think that's my job, which it isn't. I'm very fortunate I earn money, but it is not my job. And those who do know what I do, and then actually I think it gives some weight to what I'm saying. So I always try and sneak in a little bit of like, this is interesting because, but it can only ever be this much. Like, I've got to start with what's my audience's problem. They want to find great places to take their kids, and they want to know that they're going to enjoy it. And I've got to start with that. If I can weave, obviously, the places I pick. For example, you know, I'm a family day out account, but I try as much as possible to make sure it's about cultural museums, and especially the places that I know might not otherwise be able to get the word out. You know, and all of the sort of knowledge that I have of the industry will inform my choice. Like, oh, I know that place. I know they run a good family event. I can put it in. Or, you know, I know this place. I know no one's ever heard of them. So, yeah, it's kind of making sure that I don't bring my specialism too much to what I do, if that makes sense, even though it's obviously behind everything, and it's my motivating factor as well.
I love that. So we're going to now looking at the approaches to kind of how people can find and approach the right creators in the first place. So this is an open question. So Ellie, I may we'll start with you with the first one. What do you think museums and cultural organizations should look for when they're selecting influencers and content creators to work with?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's always really tricky because the internet is obviously huge, and time can be very restrictive when you're working in a museum or gallery, especially if you're kind of the only person doing social, or you might be doing multitude of things. But I think I always look for someone who's got a really authentic voice. I know I've mentioned that before, but I think an interesting point of view, or someone that knows their audiences. I think a knowledge of creating content for social media. How do they use hooks in their content to engage their audiences, and is their audience engaged? I think that's really important. There's sometimes a bit of a misconception that a big follower base means that you're going to get a lot of engagement out of things, and actually it's those macro and micro content creators that can really help your brand or your organization meet the right people where they are already, and you see a lot of that engagement. We've just opened our new learning centre at the gallery, and we worked with a lot of family content creators to come in on a press day, and the content they were creating was perfect for their audiences. And we saw that in the comments where they were saying, I had no idea this was reopening, I can't wait to come down. And it's those kind of things, having a mixture of different content creators. You don't necessarily have to go to the people with the biggest followings. Actually, what might be better for your organization is someone that's on the ground with these people who they trust. They've had other recommendations from them to go to things with their families or with their friends, and they can kind of help you meet the people that you want to. And I think, yeah, just looking at people, like spending a bit of time every week, if you can, being in online and on those platforms to try and find those people. It's really tough to research content creators, and so you kind of have to be in it a little bit, or researching people, going to other people's platforms, looking in the comment section, who else is commenting, seeing where it can lead you, almost going down a little rabbit hole. So I think those are my kind of top tips really for finding them, but it is hard, and I think it's a bit of trial and error, and just being on their platforms and seeing their other content is really important as well, so you know that they're the right people for you and you're the right people for them as well, with that kind of briefing process after that as well.
So Matt and Vyki, these are questions kind of both aimed at both of you two. So Matt, obviously you've got now almost 1 million followers across your two platforms, across your Instagram and TikTok. But on your way up, when did you start getting approached to create content for culture organizations, and what has that changed the bigger you've got, or how did that look for you?
Well, the kind of institutions that contact me now are different from in the beginning. I'm going to give an example. One of the first, or actually the first organization that contacted me was Flemish Masters, and they are part of Tourism Flanders here in Belgium, and they promote like the Flemish Masters, Breugel, Rubens, Van Eyck, those guys. And they reached out to me when I only had like 5,000 followers on Instagram, a bit more on TikTok, but still, they were the first to take a chance on me, and I still work with them today. So that relationship has evolved, it has changed, and like this year I'm making four videos with them, and it's amazing. They are a great partner, they're a perfect fit as well, because I am from Flanders, I'm in the middle of it, I'm surrounded by art cities, so I love promoting like my own, or the artists that are close to me. So that is really, really, it clicks. And I think if you're a museum and you're looking for creators, I think what's important, look for talent. Sounds simple, but whether someone has like 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 followers doesn't really matter. If they're creative, if they're good storytellers, that's really important. And if they're passionate, then give them, reach out and invest in them, and then help them grow, and try to build a long-term relationship. I think that is super valuable, and that's what I've had with Flemish Masters, and it feels really, really good to have such a long-term relationship. Is what it is. Yeah.
That's a brilliant answer. And then Vyki, for you, how do people approach you, and is there any good or bad ways to approach you as a creator?
Yeah, so I'm kind of the other side. I'm like a micro creator. I think I've got just hit over 40,000. So for me, that feels big. I was talking to, when I first started my blog, which was 10 years ago back in the day, I was getting 40 people reading it. But I remember I went to an event, and somebody had signed "Where Have You Heard From It?" Museum Mum, and I was like, oh my goodness. So I was like, does anyone read this? And it was just chance. I'm not sure, but. And it goes to show, I think for me, it's about impact, like who's going to give you the impact. And that depends on what impact you want. It might be you want somebody to completely rethink your collections and to say something completely different to how you normally say it, and you learn something from that. And it might be that. If it's, in my case, it's usually you want people to turn up or to buy something, and then it's about that trusted authenticity you have with influencers, particularly around my size. But even I was getting offered definitely free and certainly paid collaborations from about 4,000 followers. So it doesn't have to be a big amount. It just has to be the right person who's offering what you want. So you have to be clear on what it is you want from the start.
I like that. So in terms of approaching you, are there any red flags when it comes to approaching you as a creator? I suppose everybody. I mean, Ellie, you might have had experience from working with so many creators, but yeah, what kind of are the red flags for you when someone approaches you as a creator to work with you? Anybody?
Oh, sorry. I will jump in. I think the first thing is it being inappropriate for the platform. So you don't actually understand what they produce. Um, so I think there has to be some understanding. Like Ellie said, you have to do a little bit of legwork first to identify the right people and the reason you want to work with them. I think if you start with that, you already start with, oh, you know who I am and you know what I do. This is not generic. I think also the ask has to be reasonable, or at least proportionate to what you're expecting or hoping for. And maybe we'll talk about paid versus free collabs at some point. But I think it has to be proportionate. And I think also speed and turnaround. Like sometimes I get people like, oh, can you, we want this and we want it, like this week. And it's just like, really? It's especially when you talk about micro-influencers like me, most micro-influencers have a job or caring responsibilities. They're going to have a very set, small amount of time they have to produce this. And so, for example, at the moment, I'm having to turn down 95% of my invites because I'm not free and they're all on working days. And that's just the way it is because it's set up for journalists who get paid to attend these things, or people of independent means, which I'm not. So those are some things that just come off the top of my head.
I think there's something really interesting there, and I think you did touch on it a little bit. So from a careers perspective, is there what does a non-monetary incentives look like? I know, so obviously, Ellie, I know when you worked with some of the 200, you had different scales of some of them got paid and some didn't get paid for whatever reason. How does that work? Yeah, how did you create those kind of incentives? How can other organizations maybe look at that?
Yeah. For our 200 Creators Network, so we had 20 creative collaborators all got paid the same fee, which was £4,000 to create content for us on different, depending on what platform they wanted. We had different things for that. And then the wider network, we've gifted them all a year's long gallery membership, and we're also putting on exclusive events and different things with different platforms and things like that. But there's no obligation to create content. I think that's really important. I want to pay everyone if they're creating content for us, but sometimes budgets don't allow that. So I think in return, we're being able to offer them these kind of amazing experiences in the gallery, which I love getting them in the gallery as well. So we've been doing, so during our press views for exhibitions, for example, we'd only really have press coming in the mornings mostly. So for that afternoon, the exhibition was kind of free. So we've created these comms views where we can invite creators in. They get to see the exhibition before it opens. They have a space to create content if they'd like to, or they can just come and see the exhibition before it opens. And also it's a really good networking opportunity. What I found with launching this network, I'm not a content creator myself, so I was kind of coming into this thing, do content creators want this kind of thing? We just didn't know. And actually that's something that's been really interesting, is that they really want this in-person space to meet each other. A lot of them are saying, I've followed this person online for years, but I've never been able to meet them. Or, there's loads of different people, they've come together and actually created friendships. There's WhatsApp groups, they go to the pub after these events, like it's amazing. And I think offering them, even if you can't offer them money to create content, I think offering them experiences like that is also an amazing opportunity for them. But I think not expecting content is also really key there, because you can't expect that kind of free labor. But I think I've loved just being able to meet them in the space where the gallery is, and sometimes they do create content and it's amazing, and you can then see that passion that they've just been really excited to come to this event, and it's amazing to give them that exclusivity as well, I think, and make it feel really special for them. So that's some ways we've been able to kind of do that kind of free versus paid. But obviously if there's any content that we're there's certain key messaging that we might need, or we're expecting them to create a certain length of video for our Instagram as well as theirs, we would pay them that rate to kind of be able to do that. I think that's also really important.
And Matt, I suppose obviously you're a bigger content creator, and I'm assuming is it your full-time job? Do you do it full-time? So yeah, so obviously from your perspective, it's your job. So how do you kind of manage that kind of expectation of working for free or not working for free, and how does that apply for you as a larger creator?
If I'm honest, creating the videos that I make, they take quite some time to make. Research, I have equipment, they take effort, and I've built an audience as well that is worth something, that has some value. So there's a price. I have to feed 2 children, and you know, but I'm always open to negotiations and to talking about, you know, what is the budget and what can we do, or can we do with that. But to be honest, I'm just grateful that I can do that. I've turned my hobby into a profession, so that's, you know, that's a dream come true. And but I have to, you know, the past couple of years have been like a learning curve for me as well on, you know, on the business side, learning, okay, what is a fair rate? What is, you know, in the beginning, I think my prices were too low, and then I've learned, okay, I'm worth something. I have a manager now as well who helps me with that, because I wasn't that good at it. So he does all the business side of the gays, and he does negotiations and draws up contracts. So everything is, you know, as it should be. But that has been a learning curve for me, I have to say. Yeah.
And I think that's important to remember as well, because we are, like, it is people's jobs, but also on top of that, the content creators within the arts and culture sector, a lot of it is passion based. A lot of it does come, it's not so much where we're out here to try and be influencers and try and be famous as such. It's, I've got a passion for this topic. And
sorry to interrupt you. In fact, that's how the Gays started, as a passion project. You know, I used to work for the public broadcaster here in Belgium, and the Gays was, I started a YouTube channel, and that was my creative outlet. So I could create videos without someone watching over my shoulder and telling me what to do. I just did my thing, and it started from a passion, and that passion is visual culture. It's film, it's photography, it's art, and that has turned into a profession. And I have to, and you know, that came with the learning curve. Turning it into a profession was like, no, okay, I have new things to learn, and that's what makes it, you know, keeps it interesting for me as well. Yeah.
And this is kind of wasn't on the questions list, but now that it's got me interested. Is there a community of you now? Is there a community of other art creators that you kind of connect with and that you work with and speak to around how to work with cultural organizations, or how does that work for you?
There is this, I wouldn't call it a community, but I'm like Mary McGillivray is someone I DM with sometimes. We know each other. Matthew from the Fine Art Collective, who is a rising star, is and they both are. We're also working with Flemish Masters, actually. So the three of us we're connected in that way. And obviously, I follow the creator space in you know, in the arts and culture. I have to do that. I love doing that. You know, being inspired by other creators, and they push me forward. We push each other forward, basically. Yeah.
So Vyki, as a micro influencer, are there any things that when it comes to working with cultural organizations, outside of them, obviously, because like you mentioned, your time and stuff like that, and you have to be very particular about what you can take. What advice would you give to somebody if they're coming to you saying with a project, if the budget is low, how can they? What would be the steps you say they should take to say, okay, this is how we can connect with you, and this is something you would at least consider, not necessarily saying you take, but you consider.
So I think there's 2 things. But normally people don't know how I work or how other influencers work. They'll be like, hey, can you do this? And it might be, you know, quite. And so often I go back and say, look, what is it you want? Because if it's you want me something free, like I'll see if I can fit it in with my, you know, like Ellie was saying, is this good for me? Or do I want to take my kids here? Do I want to visit? Are you going to put something on special? Is it going to be unique experiences? Is it going to be something that I couldn't pay money for, or something like that? So is it something where I'm like, wow, that's really exciting? And I think if I'm excited about it, then even though, so as Ellie said, if you are not paying, you cannot demand content. It is unfair to exploit people. You know, and that said about how much work goes into create a platform and things like that. You can't demand that for free. But if you can offer something so compelling that someone's like, I want to be there, and you know what, my audience is going to love this, I can't wait to get it online, then that I think is reasonable. I think, as Ellie said, once you start saying, well, I need these key messages, I want sign off, I want you, for example, I won't do any co-collabs with unpaid visits. So a lot of people will tag smaller places, they want the reach, they want to, you know, and for them that's their deal. For me, I think, well, no, because what would I charge people for if I'm already just saying, oh, I'll just pop you on as a co-collaborator and you can go on both platforms. For me, that's a charge service. But obviously, everybody works slightly different. But I think that idea of creating something special is probably the first step. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'd never thought about that. That's a really good point, especially about around the co-collaborator post. That's a really good insight. So, looking at like engagement, I think that leads into that quite well. Ellie, how should cultural organizations create briefs that give influencers that kind of creative freedom, but also allow for institutional goals to kind of be reached as well? How do you get that balance?
It's a really interesting one, and it can be tricky. Obviously, when we're working, I try and be as clear with my creators, and obviously giving them that creative freedom as well. I think having a brief that kind of sets out is really clear and concise. It sets out what you want them to focus on. So, for example, if it's one of our kind of exhibitions, so our Siena exhibition's just opened, so we're working with a couple of content creators on content for that. And we've kind of given them an outline of what the exhibition is, and then also kind of some of the key messages that not necessarily want them to say, because that would feel really kind of inauthentic. And I think that kind of, I want them to kind of describe this exhibition in a way that they perceive it for their audiences. So we always give them kind of like a kind of overview of the exhibition, and then some key kind of points maybe that's related to the exhibition or the kind of content that we're thinking of. But I think we're also very open to collaboration. It is a collaborative effort with us. It's not something that we are saying you must stand here and you must talk about all of these different things. So I think we always say, in terms of like tone of voice and things, we're always saying that's in your own style, that's in how you perceive it. And I think it's also about like just conversation. Like, we do pull together these briefs, but they're mainly kind of just to give them information. It's more information building, like our timeline. So obviously setting deadlines of like, this is when we would send a contract to you, this is when we'd expect to first edit or when we can film. But the rest of the time it's usually on calls where we're discussing together. So can you come and see the exhibition, or when can you come in and maybe we'll have a talk about some of these key points or what you thought was really interesting in the exhibition. If possible, we'll always send them kind of a PDF of the catalogue maybe, or some like key learnings around different paintings that they might be interested in. But I think it's all about that collaborative effort, and like, chatting through with them on a call is so helpful, because they might have different ideas that might not come across in our brief, that they might not think is quite right, but actually we're like, yes, that sounds like a way better idea than what we had. So I think it's talking it through and getting on a call with them quite early on, I think, and kind of laying it out, but making it a conversation, not something that you're just telling them. Because again, like I said, like that's where you get those really authentic kind of videos from, and those amazing hooks at the beginning of videos that really catch people's attentions, which we're coming at it from more of a kind of institutional level. So we've kind of been working with these, potentially for exhibitions, working with these key messages for months, and actually a fresh perspective is always welcome. So yeah, I think that's kind of the best way to kind of go about it, I think.
And then me being the data geek, from a perspective of data and how you can kind of help justify it, do you look at KPIs at all, or what do KPIs look like for you guys in that sense?
Yeah, it's always tricky, because it's very hard to quantify these things, and then you always get the question of, well, did that relate to ticket sales or footfall? You can't say that, unless I had one of my data and insight team like on the door all the time asking, did you see this content creator? Like, yeah, it's just not feasible. I think what's most important for me is the engagement on the post. So I'm always looking at the comments. I'm looking at kind of the depth of engagement. So if you're seeing a lot of comments, people going, wow, I didn't know that, or I didn't know this exhibition was around or had opened, I can't wait to go and see that. That's basically what I can justify as saying, look, we've engaged people that would not have seen this content before. Obviously, video views is amazing, and particularly on TikTok, when something starts going viral, it's all very exciting. But I do really believe in the kind of the conversations that are happening under the video more than anything. I mean, it can, colloquially maybe relate to like footfall, like for our 200 creators project. One of the videos was by HRH Georgiana, who's an amazing content creator doing about things to do in London, and she talked about one of our Friday Lates, and we posted that the morning of one of our kind of special Friday Lates. and our learning team said they had around 300 extra people than they would have done. I can't necessarily say that is directly linked, but I would say that's a pretty good reasoning that could have been, because why else would they have come for that? So there are moments where you can kind of, tag it together with stuff, but I think it's making it important. I've always made the case within the National Gallery that this isn't necessarily about driving footfall to the gallery. It's about making people aware of us in the digital space, wanting to follow us, wanting to look at our content. A lot of people online, they won't be in London, they won't be in the UK, they'll be across the world. So it's making them aware of us digitally, and then hopefully in the future when they visit London, they'll see us as a destination to come. But I think it's making that really clear to, potentially key stakeholders, that actually that depth of engagement with their followers is actually just as important as them instantly coming to the gallery. That's not really how that works. It would take quite a while to warm up to come to the gallery. So I think that's kind of where I'm looking, is when people are excited by the content, because I'm always really excited by the content. So it's great when other people are as well. So yeah, I think that's really key to kind of not have to kind of always justify it in a way like it creates this, like your goals can be more around engagement and what's happening in the platform itself.
And I think there is something in culture organizations where we need to move away from the idea that social media, or even less the language of the internet in general, is a place to drive tickets. It's a place to reach people and to create curiosity and to create ideas around what it is you do, or how people think. There's something I've been really thinking about, especially regardless of where you may sit politically, the way the world is currently. I think culture organizations struggle to maybe communicate some of their stories because of the way the world is currently. And I've started to think, do culture organizations need to hire comedians? Because I feel like comedians are just so good at telling stories in a way. Do we need to get some more comedians as influencers and really kind of, even like the way you tell your stories, Matt? Like, how do we get more people to tell the truth in a way that is more palatable for everybody?
One of the things that is really important to me is, if you can combine entertainment with education, you got gold. That's a combination that works really well, because people don't realize that they're learning something when they're having a laugh or when they're inspired, or and to come back to your last question and about measuring success. In my case, I think raising awareness is my, when I do campaigns, it's always about raising awareness about a museum, and that's difficult to measure. But it's also about educating people about art, about, educating people about your art in your museum and your collection in such a way that it reaches people that you maybe wouldn't reach in another way, or people that maybe wouldn't normally walk into your museum. So to me, it's about raising awareness and educating people, and those things are very tough to measure. But as Ellie said, comments are really, really important. The quality of the comments, what are people saying? Did they learn something new? Did they like the content? Did they say things like, okay, I'm gonna, next time I'm in London, I'm gonna go to the gallery. And also shares and saves, to me, are two very important metrics, because those indicate that the content really resonated. If people save something or they share it with their friends, that's when it clicked. So yeah, in my case, raising awareness and educating people is important. Yeah.
Love that. All right, so we're coming to the end. So one last question. What's one piece of advice everybody would give to museums looking to start working with influencers, but they just don't know where to begin? So just one really simple takeaway would everybody recommend? And we'll start with Vyki, and then we'll work our way around.
Oh goodness, I'm really not prepared for this. I think the thing is, start with what you want to happen as a result. I think people are like, oh, we need to work with influencers, and like, right, who's around? I think if you start with, well, what's the outcome I want, and then working back from that. But also, there was this discussion about metrics and things like that. Think about how you're going to measure, because I think sometimes it's about view. It can be reduced so much to view numbers, But actually, if that impact is off platform, how are you going to measure that off platform? Have you thought that through? Because if, say, for example, we've talked about shares and things like that. Some of my posts, I'm just like, maybe the shares are low. People don't respond immediately. And then I'll get a DM from someone, I've followed you for years, I've been to all these places, I've never heard from them before. I didn't even know that was happening. So there can be a lot going on under the surface that's impossible to measure, which gives us all hope, I think. But also it's just something to sort of to bear in mind. What do you want and how are you going to measure it, not just on platform as well?
It's brilliant. Ellie?
I think just do your research. I think just spend time on the platforms, finding people. Obviously, Vyki, that's such a good starting point, is to know what you want out of the content. And I think the next point is finding the right person and not just going, like content creators, like the worst thing you can do is probably Google like content creator London, because like where's that coming from? And I think you can tell. I think from my experience, I think creators can tell when you know their content. So like the people that I've worked with, I've researched, I've watched their content, I'm engaged with them. Sometimes I am also following them on my own personal accounts. So I think just carving out time, obviously time is so stretched in the museum and gallery sectors, especially smaller museums. But I think if you can carve out an hour or two a week just to be scrolling a little bit, it might feel weird because it is work, it is research, but I think that really helps you to find the people that are really speaking, that might speak to their audiences about you, or would speak to your audiences too. So I think just carving out a little bit of time just to be on the platforms itself, to be able to research people and find the right people for you. I think that's really important.
Yes, absolutely. It is work. Get to know the space, the creator space, watch videos, do your scrolling, and figure out over time what content works for your museum, which one doesn't, and look for talent, look for those storytellers, passionate people, and they might be hard to find, but if you scroll enough and if you keep on scrolling and watching, you will find them. And once you found that little nugget, so to speak, reach out and set something up. And once you know that space and the platforms, obviously as well, every platform is different. Every creator has their own unique style on that platform and their own audience. But once you know all those things, it's going to be much easier to figure out who is going to be a good fit and who isn't. Do the work, scroll TikTok and Instagram, and get inspired. Yes.
I think a really easy way to begin as well, if you go to some of the larger cultural organizations, who's tagged them, just look at who's tagged them, even if that's the first place to begin, who's tagged that person, or even some of the bigger creators who's tagged them, and you can start to see people. And if there's a niche subject that you're really interested in, just search that subject matter on the platform and start to just kind of delve into it. And then in terms of just scrolling social media, if you feel like it's not work, there are ways you can make it more formulaic. So you can, if you're scrolling, make sure maybe you're just taking down keywords. And I think it was Meg who used to work at HDK. Meg Edwards, she said to me, she used to scroll social media for like 15, 20 minutes. And anything that she thought was interesting that could make a content idea, or she could use later on with her clients, who just take a note of it. So just start to think processes like that. On Instagram, you can save content and make folders. So if something comes up you think is interesting, save it so you can come back and refer to it. I have so many folders on Instagram. I have so many saves on LinkedIn from things that I need to come back to this. I need to refer back to that. So those are just good ways to start beginning.